I've been following Harriet's work for some time now, and it was a real honour to be talking with her today for this episode. We're talking today about healing our relationship with food, raising children to have a healthy relationship with food, and the impact of social media on our body confidence and how we interact with food. So, with no further ado, here is James and I's chat with Harriet.
Well, should we start? Harry, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do.
Yes, so I'm a psychological therapist, and I specialise in working with people who have disordered eating, and sort of just helping them change their relationship with food and body image. So yes, I'm very much coming at it from the kind of psychological perspective.
Okay. And I think you're very open. You've been very open. You're open on your kind of profile. You're very open on your platforms. And since I've been following you, about your own journey with disordered eating and that you have recovered from bulimia.
Yeah.
And, would you feel comfortable sharing a little bit more about how, about your own journey with disordered eating and that you have recovered from bulimia?
Yeah.
And, would you feel comfortable sharing a little bit more about how, that your journey there and how you overcame that? Because I think it's really important to know that sometimes that the people you are the most vulnerable with and sharing with really can empathize. They have been on that journey.
Okay, so I'm the eldest of four as well. Eldest of four girls. I grew up on a farm in Cambridgeshire, and my family is very traditional. And being the eldest child, I was sort of expected from quite young that I was going to kind of take on the farm and like carry on the family business. So this probably doesn't sound very much related to food, but it was quite an important part of my journey, I guess, in terms of how I grew up and kind of the actions that were on me. So as a young child, I think I had quite a kind of idyllic childhood up until about the age of 11. Had a lot of extended family, loads of open spaces. It's like really fantastic in many respects, lots of things I'm really grateful for. But when I went to secondary school, I changed schools, which was a little bit of a difficult transition. I went from like a really sheltered, kind of protected little school where I had loads of really close friends, going into a kind of bigger school. I mean, again, it was kind of fine, nothing sort of hugely traumatic, but I think, that transition wasn't the easiest. But particularly at home, as I became a teenager, I guess what had been kind of so idyllic and wonderful as a young child started to become quite suffocating and a bit more kind of limiting, really, because I guess I wanted to, as all teenagers do, have a lot more kind of freedom, and it didn't kind of go quite so well with my family and what was expected of me. So I kind of got through secondary school sort of okay, really. I think I wasn't really myself in lots of ways. I didn't have any issues with food at that point, but I wasn't completely comfortable with being myself. I've probably kind of compared myself a lot, got a lot of standard teenage stuff, really. But then when I went to sixth form, it was a bit of a life-changing moment, because I think I suddenly realised, oh my God, there is a whole world out there beyond the farm. This is like, part of me is like, this is amazing. Like, I want to go travelling, I want to go to university, I want to do all these things. And my family were really like, you can't do that. You've been brought up to kind of work on the farm and take that on. So that was kind of for me when issues with food started. So it's quite interesting, really, because I think people often think it's all about kind of body image and how I looked and everything. But actually, probably up until that point, I was just a very intuitive eater, just to eat everything and anything. I just had a very, very active life. I didn't even really stuff out my body, really. But going to sixth form, suddenly realising I wanted to do all these things. I had my first serious boyfriend, and then there was a lot of friction at home. And I just remember like looking in the mirror one day and thinking, oh, I want to change my body. I want to lose weight. And I wasn't overweight or anything. I was probably about the same weight as I am now. I don't weigh myself, but it's just like normal healthy weight. And I quite quickly then, I didn't really even know as well about dieting or anything. My mum had never dieted. It was all a bit of a new world. But I quite quickly lost quite a lot of weight very rapidly. So I guess put myself into that kind of classic terrible starvation place where you really quickly become preoccupied with food and, you know, all the kind of negative things that go with that, really. And my mental health probably really massively deteriorated as well, just sort of wasn't eating properly. But very quickly that sort of spiraled into bulimia, probably sort of anorexic for about 3 months. And yeah, so it's very quickly I spiraled into bulimia. And then that was then the kind of beginning of, that was when I was 17, and I continued to have bulimia until I was about 24. So I still, sorry, I'm talking a lot here, but I still, I kind of went off to uni, and I went against my family, and it was kind of like the best thing I ever did, but also one of the hardest things I ever did, because I had to live with an awful lot of kind of guilt that I'd done, let my family down, and kind of gone against everything that I'd been brought up to be and all the rest of it. So it was a very difficult time. And I think the way I kind of survived those few years and kind of started to work through it all was using the eating disorder. And yes, and I mean, and sadly that kind of affected my life for sort of 7 years. But thankfully, I was very fortunate in a way that even when I was at university and I went traveling as well, I kind of always had my head above water. So I was still, I managed to get my degree. I still had relationships. I was kind of doing things as normal, but I guess it was hugely compromised because the eating disorder was kind of there in the background. So yeah, so that's kind of, I guess that's kind of like a sort of summary of how I, you know, my early life and how it kind of developed into an eating disorder, and then like how I came out the other side. Obviously then things have been quite different again from my mid-20s until now, and I'm in a much kind of better place really, which I can talk a bit more about, but I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, no, definitely. And was there like can you pinpoint a moment or a time when that shift came for you, when you were able to see a bit more clearly that actually the eating disorder wasn't serving you like it had, there was something more, there was a different kind of life that could be led free of it, you know? How did you overcome?
I'd like to know is how you identified it. Were you aware you had it? Were you aware you were going through this, or was it like, did someone approach you and say, Harriet, maybe you need to address this?
So I mean, I think, yeah, so I try not to answer both the questions and just chip in or whatever. So I think initially I didn't really kind of realize what was going on too much. I guess I was just so in it. And people around me as well, I think what happened with me is I lost weight quite quickly, and then I looked very, very thin and ill for quite a short period of time. So when I was very thin and ill, people were kind of asking me questions and were worried, but because I then very quickly spiraled into bulimia, my weight normalized again very quickly, and I just looked back to normal, and then I hid it very well. So I kind of stayed under the radar really, and I guess in a way as well, things have changed so much back then, and it wasn't something you could talk about very openly, and if you know, I did try and go to the doctors once, and you know, there was just no help available back at that point. So I kind of muddled through really. But I think I was kind of quite fortunate that I never saw it was going to be something that I was going to have to live with forever. Like I really saw this was a kind of temporary blip, and it was a really horrible phase, but somehow I was going to get through it. And I don't know quite why I believe that. I mean, I think in some ways, although my childhood in some ways had some real challenges, I think the kind of positive of that was that I had to be quite resilient and stand on my own 2 feet from quite young, and had to take on quite a lot of responsibility. And I think I did get quite a lot of strength from that, and just thinking, actually, I'm not going to let this ruin my life. I'm going to come through it, and I'm going to find a way through it. So from almost like, I had the eating disorder for 7 years, but I think probably I say the first 2 years were kind of all a bit of a blur, and I was kind of very in it. But then I was kind of deciding that I wanted to try and get well. So I was kind of trying to do it a lot on my own as well. Like, so I was kind of, just trying to do it by kind of sheer willpower of trying not to binge, trying not to purge, doing all of that. So I kind of knew quite early on this wasn't helpful, and I needed to find a way through it, but I just didn't, I didn't quite know how I was going to get to that point. Yeah.
You did, which is amazing. And how is that kind of like, obviously the work you do now, you work as an eating disorders counsellor, you work within the NHS. Was it your journey that brought you to where you are now then?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think I was classically the kind of, when I started out, I was classically the kind of wounded healer. And I think I knew from my early 20s that's what I wanted to do. I had no idea really quite how I was going to do it. Like I hadn't really, I think so much of my younger energy was directed into like not doing farming and getting away from that. I hadn't really got a constructive plan in place. Do you know what I mean? I just kind of knew, I kind of vaguely, I wanted to kind of help people.
But not that. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I don't want to milk the cows anymore. So definitely. I mean, I started my counselling training when I was 24. So yeah, and I kind of knew that's what I wanted to do. So it absolutely did inform kind of and influence what I ended up doing as a career.
So I was going to say, did growing up on a farm affect your relationship with food at all? Was it a dairy farm? I mean, did it affect how you approach food now, or as a child, did it affect how you ate or anything like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it was mainly arable farm actually, but they had my dad's got a dairy herd as well. So, I think really kind of growing up, like we ate everything. Like we obviously weren't vegetarians, kind of having like animals on the farm and everything, so we're kind of, so ate everything. I suppose my mum's really good, like home cooking and everything. So I think I had a kind of real appreciation of food, and obviously like kind of taking care of animals and all that kind of thing. I suppose you have a greater appreciation of kind of where your foods come from, and an understanding of that. I think as well, I was very lucky that in terms of, I think we lived such an active lifestyle, constantly sort of like having to work on the farm as well and everything, that really, as a child, I ate loads of sugar, and, my teeth have really suffered, but never kind of had, we were all kind of like healthy weight just from such an active lifestyle, really. So there was never anything about kind of good or bad foods, or, just kind of ate the whole range of foods, really.
And I think it's really important, isn't it? I think as a parent, especially, and trying to raise your children to have a healthy relationship with food. I think, we talk a lot, don't we, in the non-diet world about the inherited stuff we bring with us, the baggage we bring with us, but that it is so important, isn't it, to have that kind of like neutral, and model that for your kids around food, and not use that dichotomous kind of language, because it's still so insidious, isn't it? It's everywhere still, isn't it? This good, bad, clean, dirty, junk, it's hard.
Yeah, well, no, I think it is really hard, isn't it? And I think, obviously I've got 3 children, and, a teenage daughter as well. And it's so interesting. I think, she's just starting to absorb a lot of those messages from her friends, and obviously she doesn't really want to listen to what I've got to say, because I'm her mum, and I don't know the answer to these things. So it is really challenging, isn't it? I think, but with my own children, I really just try to model, we just don't have good and bad foods. We eat a whole range of things. They see me regularly eating a whole range of foods as well, and I kind of think kind of modeling is often the best way, isn't it, rather than even from what you're saying.
Yes, definitely.
Kind of work to try and do that.
But it's interesting, isn't it? The teen thing in particular, I think my son is still slightly oblivious to it, but my middle daughter, who's 11, she's becoming more and more aware of that language, even amongst her friends. She's got friends who at the age of 11 have said things like, I need to go on a diet. Do you think this generation are under a different kind of pressure, like a different level of awareness compared to perhaps our own generation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts younger, doesn't it? Just perhaps this whole awareness, and just with all the social media stuff. And I know there's been quite a lot recently. I haven't looked at it, but just heard about it, all kind of TikTok as well, promoting a lot of diets and everything. So, and I mean, people are on TikTok from like so young, aren't they? So, you know, I think it's really hard when you're exposed to all of that. I think there's much more pressure. I think on the other hand as well, just the younger generation growing up, I think some of them do really embrace kind of bodies, like positive messages and intuitive eating, and much more kind of body acceptance. I think maybe in a way that kind of older generations didn't do that in quite the same way. So I think there's kind of pros and cons really, but I think it's hard, isn't it? Probably the kind of diet messages and perfected images are more intense than the more productive messages.
Yeah, they have more leverage, don't they? Because I guess that's where the you know, still for the diet industry, that's where the money is, you know, by selling this kind of highly curated artificial image. I think we're also still sold that belief, isn't it, that if we can look a certain way, then everything else in our life will be fixed. Everything's perfect if you know, can.
Feels like there's like no middle ground now, though, isn't it? It's like you've got the quite aggressive social media, and like you say, the TikToks and the Instagram and the fitness models and the fitness industry that I am part of is saying one message, and then you've got the more openness to mental health now. Everyone's, you know, be kind, and a lot more mental health awareness to eating disorders and depression and everything that all links in together. But you haven't got that middle ground yet, I don't think, really, or it's just starting to form. That sort of stops out, bridges it. So you've got one side shouting at you to be a certain way, and then there's nothing to there's no like safety net until it's too late. And then you've got mental health issues, it's okay to have them, but there's no sort of bridging that gap. Does that make sense? So there's no one's really sort of building that safety net before someone falls into the acceptance. It's okay to have mental health, but there's nothing really to help people stop them going down that rabbit hole.
No, definitely. No, I mean, I think you're really right, actually. I think there is a big kind of gap in between. And I think there's kind of, it is very much, isn't it? Because I think there's a lot of people as well probably have disordered eating, but they wouldn't identify perhaps with the eating disorder side of things, mental health side of things. They would see themselves more in the kind of fitness space where they're kind of trying to promote kind of health and all the rest of it. And I think you're really right, really, that there's a big kind of gap in the middle. And it's quite hard, isn't it? I think it's all very well, you kind of got intuitive eating on one end and kind of like completely accepting your body, but that's just a step way too far for a lot of people. You definitely need some sort of some integral kind of steps to kind of get from one place to the other.
Yeah, and I think it's quite easy for people to then hide behind certain things. They could use the body positivity movement as a way to hide eating disorder one way, maybe like overeating. And then you've got the fitness industry where you can be training 6 times a day and controlling every macro you eat. And that's another way of someone just disguising an underlying issue, but no one's not really addressing it.
Yeah, no, sure. And I mean, I absolutely agree. I think that there is a big gap there. And I think it's really helpful maybe that kind of more people, I guess, like yourselves really are stepping forward to try and kind of fill that place.
Yeah.
How would you, is there a way you can see that gap ever getting filled? I know obviously the work we're doing and you're doing yourself, but do you think it's something that in the future is going to become better?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the kind of good work that's being done at the moment about people being able to be more open about their kind of mental health, and I think that's kind of I think that there's a lot more kind of stigma. The stigma is being reduced in a way, so people feel that they can be more open. I mean, I think as well, I'm noticing more and more people that interact with me on my account as well. They probably wouldn't have a clinical eating disorder and they wouldn't get NHS treatment, but they are really identifying with a lot of the things that I'm talking about. So I think they're starting to realise as well. You know, I think there's a kind of like a movement and awareness of people starting to realise actually this isn't actually healthy. Starting to make that shift. But yeah, I mean, I guess I hope that bridge will be that gap will be bridged, and the more and more people are kind of talking about things more.
And I think that brings us on to something really important, and I'd love your thoughts on it, Harriet, is, we talk a lot about there is no one size fits all, there's no perfect way of eating, but there are kind of red flags that, aren't necessarily a clinical eating disorder, but do mark that actually your relationship with food might not be that healthy. In your opinion, as a professional, what do you think some of those main characteristics are? We should begin to actually become a little bit more question whether or not that the way we're interacting with food or exercise perhaps isn't serving us, it's not really the most healthy way forward.
Sure. I mean, I think it's when you've got really rigid rules that you feel that you have to adhere to, and if you can't adhere to those, you get really, really anxious, so it starts to interfere with your life. And I think if you are, if you're really restricting your eating, if you're cutting out certain food groups, if you're having to kind of control your macros or whatever in a way that's really affecting you in terms of like your social life, your anxiety, everything you can do, if you're binging, if you're kind of purging through making yourself sick, taking laxatives, taking diet pills, if you're over exercising, all of those things are kind of warning signs, really. I guess if you really kind of get obsessed about numbers in terms of your weight or your measurements, if you're constantly body checking, if you're comparing your body with other people all the time, all those things I think are kind of real kind of like warning sort of flags to look out for.
And what would you say would be like the first steps? What's the most supportive thing someone can do if they are listening to this and they go, actually, do you know what, I think I'm becoming aware that actually this isn't, I'm acting out some of those things?
I think the first thing is probably just try to talk to someone, really, to talk to either like a close friend or a family member, or they could even go to their GP, and when they're able to do that, we're not in lockdown. But I guess it's kind of like really step one is just acknowledging that you have a problem, really. I think that's the first thing to do.
And I think it's difficult to acknowledge it because, we are, and I think James alluded to it, we've so normalized a lot of that language. We've so normalized, what we see being sold, especially on Fitspo and fitness accounts, as normal. And it just isn't, is it? It's just so far the other way now, I think, But I think what you said about anxiety is really pertinent as well. I think there's so much anxiety built around our eating and our exercising, because there's this fear of not either being, I don't know what your thoughts are on it, Harriet, but whether or not it's kind of like not being acceptable for wider society, or not being acceptable, or what are your thoughts on like the bigger kind of subject of our stigma around weight and what's acceptable in society, and the kind of like moral attributes we give to certain sizes and the thin ideal?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's so tricky, isn't it? Because I think these messages are instilled in us from so young, like from Disney princesses or whatever you're watching on TV or whatever. And I think it's, I think we all kind of carry those messages, don't we? They're so kind of deeply ingrained. It's quite sort of tricky. I think you don't sometimes even, I think many people just aren't even aware almost of their sort of prejudice or the way they're kind of judging people. So I think we've got a long way to go on that. I mean, I think all the kind of great stuff that's happening with Gen Z coming through and kind of really starting to challenge that and the body positive movement. And I think there is now so much more kind of acceptance and celebration of a kind of diversity of a range of bodies. But I think we've got a long way to go with that. And I think the trouble is as well with the diet industry being so kind of powerful and so strong, and I think a lot of people have kind of got the blinkers on to like listening to the other messages, because it's become very black and white, hasn't it? Kind of like thin is good in a way, and being overweight is bad. And sometimes I think people don't kind of get beyond that, really. And because I think there's so much, people carry so much shame and self-hatred and self-loathing sometimes when they're in a bigger body because of all these messages. They're not willing to kind of just give up on those, to sort of let go of those, really.
Have you ever come across kind of barriers when you're talking to people outside of eating disorders treatment, about the non-diet approach. Have you ever come across any kind of peer barrier or conflict? We talk a lot about obesity and all of those kind of things, or is everyone quite open and accepting in your experience?
I mean, I think not at all, really. I think it's really quite difficult. I mean, I think I guess I'm guilty myself sometimes as well of not speaking out perhaps as much as I should, or perhaps not challenge, not almost because of I guess just with the energy I put out into my job, I sometimes feel like I haven't got that much left over. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I kind of like, so I think I am guilty of hearing, say, like if I've been at the gym, someone kind of really praising someone else's weight loss and something, and I've kind of like thought in my head, I kind of want to step forward here and say something. But I think I'm aware as well sometimes, I think we were talking a bit about earlier about that kind of gap between one end of things and the other. I think the problem is sometimes I kind of feel like stepping in at that moment, sometimes you're just going to polarize things even more, because I think people are just so far from that place where they're going to be able to kind of understand even what you're trying to say or take that on board. So I think there's a lot of kind of education and stuff that needs to be done a bit more in that kind of in that middle ground to kind of bridge the gap, really.
And do you find, I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel uncomfortable, and I don't know if James is the same, is that having those conversations or trying to make those challenges, but we're coming from it in bodies that are at normal weights.
Yeah,
definitely. We carry a lot of thin privilege. So, supporting the body positivity movement is one thing, but, it's not necessarily our story to tell.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Am I making it's that?
Yeah, no,
and then
definitely.
I could become fearful, actually, of not wanting to encroach or co-opt or be another person in a small body saying, oh, you should be able to, you should, have this great relationship with food. And, people turn to me and say, well, that's okay for you.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think it's a really good point, isn't it? Because I think it's to be able to kind of really reach people and for people to kind of listen to you and empathize, they want to kind of really feel that you kind of get them, and actually you can have as much, you can try as hard as you can, can't you, to kind of empathize, but I think it's very hard if you're not genuinely have stood in someone else's shoes. I mean, I think as well what's tricky is, I think I'm just thinking about some of my patients as well that have anorexia now, but as teenagers they were overweight and really badly bullied and really made to feel so ashamed. And I think just the fear and and the shame and the anxiety, the thought of any kind of weight gain is so linked back to that just horror that what they experienced back then. And I think as a therapist, you can come at it and you're kind of thinking it in a much more kind of rational way, that of course, we're not talking about you becoming, we're talking about you trying to find a healthy weight. But in terms of how they feel about that, it's quite terrifying, I think. And I think it's genuinely probably quite hard to really empathize with that unless you've been in that place.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important that we say it, we acknowledge that, isn't it? That we acknowledge our thin privilege, for sure.
For myself, mine comes from social media pressures. I'm looking at these people on Instagram, and they're saying they're natural lifters. A lot of them are enhanced lifters. They're taking a lot of gear, steroids, and they're promoting this message of, I'm a natural lifter. You can look like me with this 12-week plan, follow my secret diet plan. And I think that's a big issue I see in the fitness industry, not so much limb privilege, but people who are using enhancements and then selling like snake oil, i.e. supplements, saying, take this supplement, that will fix you, make you a big, strong man. And women. There's women doing it as well. Women will take performance enhancing drugs and then claim their physique's natural, and they got it via doing their skinny tea booty camp, and I think that's more damaging than I worry more about that than slim privilege in the fitness industry.
Sure. Well, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I guess I'm kind of thinking there's a whole kind of potential kind of client group there that never probably will even walk into an NHS setting to get help for disordered eating, because it's not kind of
it'll be sort of like hidden thing, and then what's worrying is young men looking at that and then trying to achieve these unrealistic body goals. These guys who are walking around at like 15 stone and 10% body fat, that's just ridiculous. Looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and telling these young guys who did it by doing their push-ups and eating their chicken and broccoli, and not the amount of growth hormone they're injecting into their butt. I know one guy, when I first started training, to me he was absolutely massive. So he would have been about 20 stone, and he was ripped, like all his muscles are out. And he went to a place called Body Pro, the Body Expo in Birmingham. It's like a big bodybuilding show, and all the fit experts go there and everything. And he came back from there and he felt so insecure in himself. He wore a jumper for a year, not to show his arms off because he thought they're too small. Like his arms are huge. Like he was a really, really big, like to a young man. I was at the time, that was like the pinnacle. He, but then I'm witnessing that, just starting the gym. This guy thinks he's too small and wearing a jumper. Maybe I should not be. I think that sort of is only become more and more prevalent in men.
Because I think it's just so interesting, because I think, you know, in eating disorder services, you probably see one man in like 20 people that walk through the door, maybe even less. So really underrepresented. So and I think it's quite rare. I think of I've probably seen like one bodybuilder since I've been you know, sort of practicing, and obviously hearing just the extremes that person put themselves through to maintain her physique. But yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting, isn't it? Because I think obviously there's a whole kind of there are many people there, they're really, really struggling in a very unhealthy way with their eating and exercise, and they're quite, you know, quite hidden at the moment.
Do you think with that bodybuilder, the female one you saw, and with male ones, do you think the way they run their lifestyle in controlling their diet so much and exercising to like almost like a timetable, do you think that will end up being a gateway to more and more eating disorders?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, it's generalization, but you know, I think some people almost have accepted that kind of following that disordered eating routes kind of almost become a normal thing that you have to put yourself through to achieve your end goals. You know, you kind of like lost all perspective, really. I mean, I'm thinking about Brian Keane, who's somebody, I don't know if you've heard of him in the fitness industry. He's got a quite helpful podcast actually, but he's somebody that used to compete and do kind of bodybuilding shows. And I think he kind of like, he did like really well when he was doing it, kind of, you know, got to the kind of pinnacle of where he wanted to get to. But he talks very openly as well about when he was, when he got to that place, he was so dissatisfied with his body because he'd become absolutely obsessed with the symmetry and the size of the muscles and how everything looked. And because I think when you do something like bodybuilding, you can't help but get really kind of obsessed and preoccupied and scrutinizing every body part. And I mean, in a way that's going to affect your mental health, isn't it? And it's going to lead to disordered eating, really. It's almost inevitable, I think. So I guess, you know, it's not true for everybody. I think maybe some people can do bodybuilding and stay sane and kind of manage it in a healthy way. But I think for a lot of people, they're experiencing some sort of disordered eating, and they're very vulnerable as well to their mental health worsening.
Yeah. Do you think there is a rise in, you know, there is a rise, we know that from studies, don't we, in men and boys experiencing disordered eating, but you're still not seeing that so much present in clinic then? So do you think a lot of men are still, and boys especially, I mean, when we were talking the other day, James, weren't we were talking about how I have friends whose children are anywhere between the ages of 13 and 16, and they're obsessed with getting big, and their parents have bought them pull-up bars, and you know, they want to eat the chicken and the sweet potato, and already at that young age. And I'm thinking, surely that's the same as, is that the same as my 11-year-old saying, "Mummy, I feel fat and I think I need to go on a diet"? You know, it's hard to, but is that the channel, you know, is that where it's going to manifest for boys, you know, or do you think there's a difference between the genders?
Yeah, I mean, I think with men generally, it does tend to be more the fitness side of it rather than the diet. Often, like an obsession, you know, with exercise tends to come first. And yes, like that's often kind of being bigger and being ripped, having a six-pack, those kind of things. So, I mean, I think, I'm sure we're going to go and see more and more people in clinic in the future, kind of going down that route. But I think, again, it's just that I'm kind of thinking again about kind of bridging that gap between the middle ground. Because I think as well, as a society, we've become so anxious about our child perhaps becoming obese or something. So I think sometimes parents, I guess, are thinking they're doing the right thing sometimes, aren't they, by encouraging perhaps almost this overactivity or and they're not kind of realizing in a way where's that kind of healthy balance somewhere in the middle.
And I think we hear that kind of, I hear it a lot, even with tinies, you know, you hear the language of, oh, you mustn't eat that. Literally, I've had teachers and teaching assistants message me on Instagram to say they've been in the food hall and the dinner ladies have said, no, you can't have that, because another one of that, because that will make you fat. And these are kind of like 4 or 5-year-old children, you know. It's, where do you think we need to apply the pressure, or where do you think we, as, you know, individuals working in the non-diet space, can have the most influence? Where do you think we should begin?
I mean, I guess it's, you know, it's kind of educating parents, isn't it? I guess so that they can, I mean, I suppose it's all levels. I suppose I'm thinking, you know, the younger you can start with all of this, the better. Because I think it's much harder once someone has had unhelpful messages right through their childhood. It's quite difficult for someone to kind of shed those beliefs and as they move into adulthood, you know. So I think the younger the better, really. So yeah, I mean, I think it does need to be, I'm sort of even thinking like you know, like with Healthy Week and things in schools, you know, I know for my children that Healthy Week had a big influence. I mean, I did go in and do a talk on mental health. I was lucky in our children's school to be able to do that. But I think it's being able to kind of bring in kind of those kind of aspects about kind of like intuitive eating, not having good, bad food, celebration of all body sizes from quite young. So I think it's got to be in schools. And I think it's trying to get the message across as well, because I think ultimately children learn most from their parents, don't they? And if you've got parents that are carrying these messages often quite unconsciously, it's difficult, really. But I don't know, I think there's a lot of good stuff, isn't there, on social media? Maybe we need more on television and stuff. Like, so many people watch all these crazy like diet programs, don't they? If there was more programs on that were kind of bridging the gap, that's the kind of way, isn't it, you can start to spread the message a bit more.
Definitely. And I think that those kind of TV programs, again, just go to normalize that kind of, I didn't even bring myself to watch it. In fact, I didn't even want to mention the documentary on my platform the other week, the cycling restaurant where they did spin lessons and then their food. You know, I think I felt that was so unhealthy, and so I didn't want to draw anyone's attention to it because I didn't want them to turn it on in case it was a trigger. But you know, that, you know, how on earth has that come to be something that we deem a normal form of entertainment or TV show? You know, it's, as you say, I think it's gone the other way. But starting with them when they're little, definitely.
And getting more GPs on board. I know how you said the NHS aren't quite there yet with the message, and if you've got some old school GPs saying fat is fat and that's unhealthy and bad, so they're fat shaming from a medical point of view. And if you're going into the doctor's surgery with your child, or as a person, the doctor's telling you that your BMI is too fat, you need to drop weight, or your child's BMI is too high and they're unhealthy. As a parent, you think you're going to be doing the right thing by then restricting their food or making them go out and do more exercise, which I know is healthy anyway, not to restrict food but to do exercise. But it's sort of planting that negative seed, isn't it? So if you can get more GPs on board and the NHS on board and get them, like say, on television talking about it.
I think getting stuff on TV, and you know, because I guess there's so many of these kind of programs on, aren't there? I mean, I'm not really up to date with things. I don't tend to watch them, but there's always some kind of diet thing on, isn't there? Or The Greatest Loser or something. But if there was other kind of more kind of helpful messages going out, it's going to have an influence. So much of this as well is about it is about food and all those messages, but as well it's about raising children that have a robust self-esteem and can, you know, because I think if you feel good about yourself generally and you feel like you're not, you know, just judged by your shape and body weight, in a way you can look at those messages and you've almost got a protective skin where you don't have to engage with them as much. You know, and I know that's a big ask, because like for lots of children as well, they're quite sensitive and you have a thin skin, it's really hard not to be affected by those messages. But I kind of think as well, the more we can help children to kind of grow up with a healthier kind of self-esteem, to be a bit more kind of to feel better about themselves in a way, then you don't need to engage with some of this stuff that's being bombarded at you. I mean, I think as well, it may all go horribly wrong for me, but I think I'm just incredible. I've watched my daughter at the moment, who just at the moment, she hasn't got a huge awareness about the kind of weight shape stuff. I mean, some things are coming through, but just to see in a way, because she does feel quite just good about herself, in a way, she's not engaging with a lot of that stuff. And that might just be down to her personality. You know, she is someone who's a bit more thick-skinned, and, you know, it might all go horribly wrong. But I kind of think for her, a really strong protective factor is that she's got good self-esteem. So she's going to be much better. She's got a bit of an armor on to deal with all this stuff that's going to come at her.
Yeah. And understanding that her value and her worth is something else. You know, they're different conversations completely, you know, and I think that's hugely valuable. And I think my 11-year-old's quite similar. She's aware that her body is changing, and it's actually at this point in time that she's at now where I became acutely self-aware. I was very much teased for putting on puppy fat. You know, I had the classic go out before. I didn't even go up very much, but I went out, and I was teased and bullied relentlessly for that weight gain at school. Whereas because we've had the conversations, we're very open. We talk about how your body, how these are all normal. You know, this is normal. This is, we don't talk about bodies for anything else other than how they function in our house.
Yeah, sure.
And so she's like, oh yeah, this is because, you know, oh yeah. And she almost she embraces part of all of it, because it's part of her journey. And I think, you know, being able to talk about bodies in a really neutral way as well.
Yeah,
isn't it?
really helpful.
Very helpful.
Harriet, if you had access to putting a big billboard up that the whole world could see, what message would you put on it?
I don't know, it sounds like really cliche, but I think it's something about like being yourself, and, you know, not kind of feeling that you've got to please other people. And I think so much of like my own journey was, you know, so much about my eating disorder, and so much about kind of like my struggles in my early life were in a way like trying to kind of please people around me, not really being authentic and like listening to myself. And you know, so I suppose, you know, for me that was a huge part of my journey. So yeah, I mean, it sounds really cliche, but I think, you know, it's about like being authentic, like be yourself. And like almost like kind of having that trust in a way that, you know, I do believe everybody's got their own sort of special things that, you know, things that are really special about them. And actually, when we can actually really embrace that and celebrate that and stop comparing ourselves to try and be like someone else, then actually that's the true way to kind of feeling, you know, joyful and happy and fulfilled.
Definitely. And cliches become cliches because they're true. So it's true. Very true things on a billboard.
Where can our club members find you? So they wanted to follow your work and get in touch. How could they do that?
Yeah, so my Instagram is food_freedom_coach_. So yeah, food freedom coach, and my website is foodfreedomcoach.co.uk. So yeah, either of those are good. Instagram's always a good place to start, because I do try and post there quite regularly.
Yeah, you're very, and Harriet has incredibly, your posts are really valuable in the realms of Instagram. I find your posts fantastic because you share so much knowledge. It's not just a pretty picture, you know, they're fantastic. And you also have your podcast. What's your podcast called?
Yes, okay, yeah. So yeah, and that's just Food Freedom Coach.
Brilliant. And they can find that by where they normally find their podcast?
So at the moment I've just got it on Podbean and like Apple, iTunes. So I need to kind of be a bit proactive in sharing that. But yeah, at the moment, so it's on Podbean and Apple. Yeah.
That's great.
Okay, brilliant.
Thank you so much, Harriet.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And like, you know, all the best with like this exciting new venture.
Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you have taken something away from listening, perhaps one small action you can put into practice today. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, so pop on over to Reframe Club where you can share them, your own reflections and experiences. We would love to hear from you. As always, here at Reframe Club, we are rooting for you.